What is premises liability? Premises liability is when you own property or a premises, or you manage property. So we're talking about real estate here. It might be a home, it might be commercial real estate like an office building or a factory. It could be a farm, or maybe you just own land. It really doesn't matter. The doctrine of premises liability applies. And that doctrine says that you can be liable in some circumstances for what happens on your premises. Premises liability is a form of negligence law. What is negligence? Well, negligence has 4 elements. You have a duty to act as a reasonable person would. You've breached that duty by your conduct. Your breach caused some sort of injury, and that cause was foreseeable by you, or should have been foreseeable by you, and their actual harm or damages or injury. So essentially those 4 elements: duty, breach, causation, harm, or injury. So imagine you own some property, and let's say that you put out on the property, or you leave out on the property, some rusty old equipment that looks like a really fun thing for kids who are walking by to play on. But it's sharp and it's rusty and it's dangerous and it could break at any time. Imagine now that the child climbs on the equipment. Are you liable under the doctrine of premises liability? Well, let's go through the analysis. Do you have a duty to keep your equipment that's on your property safe from people who would be trespassing from you? And then, if so, did you do it? And then obviously in this case, the equipment caused the injury. So here in this case, it illustrates the whole question of what if somebody's on your property? And there might be different categories of people on your property. What if somebody's coming on your property to steal from you? They sneak in the night. They're armed. They're coming there for the purpose of stealing from you. Or maybe it's a guest of yours. You have a home and you had some people over to enjoy a nice afternoon and the kids are playing in the backyard. Or maybe it's a business and customers are coming to the business. As you can see, there are different categories here. The doctrine of premises liability looks at those 4 categories. So what are they? An invitee. This is a person who you've invited to come on the property for a business or commercial purpose. Second, a licensee. This is a person you've invited to come onto the property for a social purpose, or they're there for a permitted purpose. Third, you have trespassers, people who are not permitted on the property but are there anyway, illegally. And then fourth, children. Children who might be trespassing. The short answer here is that you have different levels of duties to each category. You have the highest duty to a person you've invited on the property for commercial purposes. You have a lower duty for people who are there for social purposes because you have no financial benefit of having them there. And you have the lowest duty to a trespasser, but you still have some. And then in some jurisdictions, even though children may be trespassing, if you create an environment that's attractive to them, it's called an attractive nuisance. If you do that, you will likely have liability in those jurisdictions. So every state has different laws on this. This is generally what's called common law. In other words, it's not necessarily laid out in detail in the statutes. It is decided by judges over the years, and they have refined this doctrine, and then each state's appellate court or Supreme Court has determined what will be binding law in that particular state. So just keep this in mind. You do have a duty to avoid dangerous situations for people. So being negligent about leaving sharp objects in a yard, slip and falls can be negligence. Now, in Minnesota, we have ice all the time. So there's an assumption in Minnesota that during the winter, Sidewalks can be slippery, especially after a snowstorm. But perhaps after a reasonable period of time, a person could expect that a sidewalk will generally be safer. It will be shoveled, but not right away after a storm, and not after a rain that freezes. Inside a store, if there's a puddle of water leaking from a roof, if the store doesn't know about it, none of the employees know about it, they may not have any liability yet. But as soon as they know about it, or should know about it, they should be mopping it up or putting up a sign. That's where a slip and fall case can come into play. These are generalities, every state is different, but that is the doctrine of premises liability. There are a couple other things you should know. As a practical matter, you can generally get insurance to protect yourself from premises liability. That's a great option. It's really important if you have people regularly coming onto the premises. The second thing to keep in mind is that in Minnesota and many other states, we have a law called social host liability. This is kind of related, so I'll mention it. Imagine you have a little party. You don't have a bartender there, but people are drinking. And then they drive home intoxicated, and they hurt themselves or others. Under Minnesota statute, you can have liability for the injury they caused because they got intoxicated while you were hosting them socially. Now, as a general rule, if a licensed bartender is present, then the bartender doesn't have liability and you don't have liability. But there can be some gray areas in this area of law. All right, that's a summary of premises liability for beginners. This is a topic that's regularly covered in law school, but then once you become an attorney, you either specialize in this or you ignore it. And I personally do not work with premises liability, but I learned it in law school and I occasionally see it in a number of cases that I work. You can go visit aaronhall.com/free, enter your email address, and you'll get access to exclusive educational videos. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to add them into the comment section below or send them by email.